One of the most particular aspects and artistic techniques that I use when I paint still life, and I am principally a still life painter in oil and pastel, is the historic use of chiaroscuro. For those of you who don't know what it is, think about the very famous old self-portrait by Rembrandt of his face emerging out of the darkness. Rembrandt was the first individual artist whom we all know and love who used chiaroscuro to great effect. There are people in the modern age who have developed this and used this, and I have adapted my paintings to use this dark background, highlighting the effects in the still life setup, because I think that the dark and neutral backgrounds especially project the beauty of the objects in either the floral or the still life. So we will see today how I develop a still life from the initial sketch through the finished or nearly finished painting, working always with the idea that chiaroscuro, or my very dark background, will highlight the objects in the still life. How do you arrange what you put together? Some still life painters paint with a circular arrangement. What you're trying to do is to guide your viewer's eye into or through the painting. Some people use complex S arrangements. I think it gets a little technical. I personally like to use a triangular arrangement. It's simple, it's basic, and it's easy, but usually visually stunning. A triangle lets you have a high point that can be at or near the center of interest, and then there's a basic triangular motion or setup amongst the objects. Here you would see the top couple of flowers set the top of the triangle, and then I usually put 2 or 3 smaller things at the side to anchor the triangle. These sides are important for balance. I always try to include balance within my paintings, top to bottom, side to side, and front to back. So I do a certain amount of rather careful measuring. I make sure, for instance, that this edge of the left-hand image is approximately the same distance from the edge of the painting as the right-hand image. This keeps me from having things that look a little cockeyed, and it makes sure that the viewer's eye has room to move around and come back and settle on the objects. So let's put down, first of all, those values and set the values within which, and value, for those of you who might not be familiar with the term, value is the range of lights and darks. So we're going to set the lightest lights and the darkest darks down onto the support now, and that will be the value range within which we're going to work. At this stage, I really honestly do not worry about detail. This is about establishing your range of colors, your range of lights and darks. And the thing that those of you who are new to painting must always try to remember is that if you get your values right, even if your colors are wrong, successful values can create a stunning work of art, because think of photographs. Black and white photographs are nothing but value studies, and they make sense. So if your values are right, it's a little bit like composition. If your values and your composition are right, most likely your painting will be a success. Items that are reflective, like the ceramics, like the bowl, the top of our covered bowl that holds the lady's apples, they have reflected or reflections highlights. This is the very brightest part of the whole painting. It's the only place in the entire painting where I will use pure white. I have dozens of off-whites, but for the reflections on a hard surfaced object, I use absolutely pure white pastel. Then there is the translucent light that passes through a flower petal. And again, we'll get to that as we move into this flower and this flower. The light passes through, and so it becomes a warmer color than if it were actually in the light. And the very last type of light is the slight orange that we saw here, where reflected color from a nearby object is having an impact on the color here. So we have light, shadow, cast shadow, highlights, translucent light through a petal, which is very fine and delicate, and then reflected light from another object. It's a lot to keep in mind, but if you do keep it in mind, it's what's going to give your paintings of flowers a much greater verisimilitude, and people will think that they become absolutely luminous. There are several ways to define something. What I'm trying to start to define is this inner petal, but instead of defining the edge with the light color, I'm using the dark color behind it to define the edge. And all of these yum. All right. Okay. What I'm doing is reestablishing the depth of the center, because as we were working in the colors, that more or less faded away, and we want it to look like a little cup. So by adding this dark color in here, we are creating the feeling or the impression of it sitting deeper within the flower.